Hey, what up, everybody out there in the YouTube internet world? I wanted to come in and make a quick video about my testimony, my history with the police, with the justice system, um, all the different things that have happened throughout my life. So, just to get into it, back in the day, I used to be a straight up hooligan, straight up thug, running around doing this, doing that. Um, a lot of people that know me now probably couldn't even recognize that part of me anymore. But it all started back when I was like 13. Um, Started committing a lot of different crimes, doing drugs, doing this and that. My first real interaction that was negative with the police is when I went joyriding with a friend. He took his mom's car out, and apparently she called the police, and we got pulled over. I never even got to drive the car yet. But when they pulled us over, they put the red dot on us. So each one of us had a red dot on our head when we were inside the car, and then they told us to get out the car, and we had to put our hands over our head a certain way. We couldn't face the cop, and they said that they would shoot if we did anything that was out of order. Um, and I have seen videos of actually cops shooting people um, for like very similar reasons. Like they, if they didn't follow the instructions, that they were going to get fired on. So I had to get out. I had to put my hands up, and I had to walk backwards with this red dot on my head. And it was at nighttime, and I was even concerned that I was like, man, I might trip, I might fall. I was really nervous. I was 14 years old at the time. So, anyways, I ended up getting arrested. They didn't really beat me up or do anything like that, but I remember it was scary. I was just like, dang, they're straight up ready to shoot us as if we were like some kind of out there running around robbing banks or something. So that was my first like real crazy interaction with the police. Things got worse as I got older. When I was about 19 years old, I had another really bad experience with the police. I had a party, and some people supposedly, went out and were robbing some of my neighbors. I was living out in the country at the time, and some of the neighbors had, because there was like 100 people at this house party, and so some of the neighbors had basically pinned our house as the house, right, where this supposedly happened. So, anyways, I went to go drop off a couple friends, and as I'm coming back, the cops are waiting for me in my driveway. And so I get out the car, and they're questioning me, and they're talking to me, and they're like, hey, such and such got robbed. One of them was like the chief of police. Somebody was breaking into houses around here. We believe it was coming from here. And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. And I was like, some people basically, some cops already had shown up because some of my neighbors had already called the cops as a noise complaint before that. And I was like, I already told you guys, we were gonna try to keep it down. We ended up, shutting down the party at a certain time. It was like 2 or 3 in the morning, and they're like, and I was like, I ain't got nothing more to say to you guys. I was like, I'm gonna go in my house, go to sleep. I'm tired. And they were like, no, you're not. And they grabbed me, put me in an arm bar, slammed my head against the hood, and started like just degrading me. They were just like, you little, punk, bleep, 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 little B, like just saying all sorts of stuff, right? To antagonize me. I wasn't resisting arrest. I wasn't doing nothing. I pulled into my own driveway. I was trying to go into my own house. So they cuff me. They take me off to this driveway down the road from one of my neighbors, and I guess that was the police chief. And they sit there and they question me until like 5 o'clock in the morning, until like the sun started coming up. And they they kept on bringing in different people and asking me the same questions over and over again. And I kept on telling them the same story. I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. I had a party. That was it. I'm not some kind of, I wasn't running around robbing people, nothing like that. And it was all the truth. Well, anyways, I had like $300 on me at the time in cash. And apparently one of the people, they said that got robbed for cash. So I even heard it over the little radio. They're like, well, what was the increments, and they were like it was 20s. Well, I had fives and tens on me, and $300 at the time. And of course, back then I was, selling weed and doing all sorts of stuff. So, so anyways, they didn't know that, but they took the money and they said, we're going to take this as evidence. Well, I got charged with obstruction of justice, got roughed up, got questioned, I would say illegally in a driveway for like almost 4 hours. All right. And then had $300 stolen from me that night because I never saw any of that money after that day. So they straight up stole $300 from me. Of course, back then I'm young. I ain't trying to sit there and get in some lawsuit with the police and all that stuff. So I just let it be. It was just another time where I chalked it up, where I was just like, man, the cops are just corrupt. They're just twisted. All the music I was listening to growing up, was always, speaking down on the police. I remember that Ice-T song, Cop Killer, and just all the stuff. It was just a culture of like, just against the police. Like the police were the enemy, And, I grew up around black people, Mexicans, all sorts of different races and whatnot, and people from California that had come up and that had really bad experiences with the police. So this was just embedded in my head during that time in my life. So another incident that happened a couple years later, I'm driving around with some of my friends. We're all young. We're all, up to no good. And we get pulled over. The cop decides to run everybody's name in the car. Okay, which I would say is probably not standard procedure. But he runs my name. I have a warrant out for my arrest. And I didn't know it. I'm like, for what? And he's like, you're coming in. And it was a Friday. So I had to spend the weekend in jail. And the whole time I'm thinking, I'm like, what? I don't have a warrant. I was like, I had dealt with a warrant actually a year before that. And I knew I was good to go. So I go before the judge on Monday morning, because you had to sit in jail the whole entire weekend to see the judge on Monday. I go up there and I'm like, what's my warrant? And they're like, and the prosecutor, whoever is saying, oh, well, this was a mistake, apparently, Mr. Thompson had already cleared this warrant, and this it was like some kind of computer error or something where they didn't clear it on his file or something. So the judge looks at me and doesn't apologize, doesn't say anything like, oh, we just basically kidnapped you for an entire weekend. He looks at me and he says, well, why don't you take this as a token to stay on the right track? You're dismissed. And that was it. He didn't say, I'm sorry. He didn't say, dang, we just kidnapped you for a weekend and you threw you in a box, and who knows, I could have lost my job. I mean, who knows, man? He didn't know anything about my life. And that was it. And they released me. And each time one of these things would happen, man, I was pissed off. I mean, I'm telling you, back in the day, I had really bad anger issues growing up. And man, I just something about what the police had the way they were treating me. It was just like, telling you, man, it was bad. I was always pissed off at the police. Like I wanted it out for them at that point. And anyways, it gets worse. So after that whole incident, I went to a concert over at the Roseland in Portland. This was, I want to say, each one of these incidences are within, a year or two. I go to this concert. It was an ICP concert where they like spray Faygo soda all over the place. So the floor of the place was all just drenched in soda and just cigarette butts and all sorts of stuff, right? And so, basically, it's towards the end of the concert and I like spit on the floor or something. And one of the security people are like, she's like, why are you spitting on my floor? And I'm like, this is your floor? I was like, look at your floor, And I said something just like whatever. And she's like, I can't remember what she said. She was like Bruno or something. And some big old security dude came out, and he just hemmed me up real quick. And she's like, get him out of here. And I was like, what? And so they go and they open up the front doors of the building and they throw me out. And well, anyways, there's a bunch of horse cops out there, cops on horses. And there's like 4 of them. and they all turn around and to face me as soon as I get thrown out the doors, and they start coming in on me, and they back me up against the glass of the door, and one of the horses reach over and bit me on the shoulder, and the cop was like, whoa, 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 and he pulls him back, right? And so I'm just like, what the? I was like, that's police brutality, like, just start going off, right? And they're all just like, shut your mouth, you know, you little bitch, and they're just going off, right? And so I'm just heated. I'm just like da 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 da, and they're like, you need to get a move on right now before something else bad happens to you. And I'm just like, all right. So I'm just thinking like, this is crazy. You know, I already know about these police. You know, they'll do all sorts of stuff. So then I go across the street and I'm waiting for my friend, and I'm sitting there smoking a cigarette, talking to another guy, telling him what happened, and he's all like, oh man, that's messed up, da 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 da. And so all of a sudden this other cop car comes rolling up. And he looks at me and he goes, didn't I tell you to leave? And I was like, leave? I was like, I'm on a public sidewalk. I was like, this is America. I was like, basically like, F you. And so he goes, all right. He goes, okay. And so he jumps out the car. He pulls a taser on me and he says, get on the ground. And I already knew about tasers. So I was just like, whatever. And so I got on the ground, bam, puts his knee in the back of my head. And that's another thing too. Most of the times I got arrested, they put a knee in the back of my head. So this is a very common thing, whether you're black or white. He puts the knee back in my head. He's grinding my head into the concrete. You know, I got like stuff all up on it. He cuffs me, throws me in the back of the cop car, and he's taking me somewhere. And I'm like, what did you just arrest me for? I was like, this ain't even legal. And he's like, you were obstructing traffic. And I'm like, obstructing traffic? I was like, I'm standing on the sidewalk. And he just basically, he's like just belittling me, treating me like I'm subhuman. Anyways, he drops me off at a drunk tank in somewhere in downtown Portland, and I wasn't even drunk. You know, I had been drinking or whatever, but you know that was way earlier in the evening. I wasn't belligerent, and so he throws me in there. You know, I ain't got no shirt on. You know, my shirt was soaked in Faygo soda. And I'm sitting there, and it's like, you know, it was like 2 o'clock in the morning or something. I couldn't even sleep. They didn't give you no bed, you know. Eventually, 5:30 hit. They opened the whole place up. They give me some kind of like breast cancer awareness shirt, and they sent me on my way. I was like, "Where's my ticket?" I was like, "What did I get charged for?" And they're like, "Get the hell out of here." That was it. So I got once again thrown in jail. Even though, yeah, it's just a night, but guess what? I got kidnapped and thrown in a box without a t-shirt for an entire night. For no reason. I'm staying on the sidewalk. So, I committed absolutely no crimes during that time at all. You know? So anyways, so time goes by after that. I'm hanging out with some friends, and, you know, of course, we're smoking and drinking and doing this and that and everything else, you know, because back then I'm living this lifestyle, right? You know? I'm doing drugs all the time. I'm selling drugs. And I'm not trying to say I was innocent during those times, because I did all sorts of criminal activity. But the times that I interacted with the cops, most of the time, was when I wasn't doing anything, and they wrongfully came at me. Okay, so this is a key thing I want you to remember in my story here. So I'm walking home, and I'm walking home with my friend, and I have to go to the bathroom. And so I went behind one of these bus stops, and this is like, I want to say this is about, you know, 11:30 at night, something like that. And, you know, there's no public places to go to the bathroom. You know, if you got to pee, you know, and you got a 30-minute walk home, you know, you're just going to have to find something, right? And so I'm not peeing in public, nothing like that. Well, anyways, there's some cop, I guess, that's parked across the street at this Goodwill. I don't know what he thinks going on. He pulls up, you know, puts the spotlight on us. He's like, hey, put your hands up, this and that. So I come out of there, come out of the back of it. I got my hands up the whole time. And I'm standing there, and he's like, put your hands around your head, da-da-da-da. I'm standing, my friend. He comes up, cuffs my friend, sits him down on the curb. Then he comes over to me, and he's like, what the hell do you think you're doing? And I'm like, what are you talking about? He pulls my arms down. He cuffs me and throws me into the bus stop. He starts slamming my head on the seat, and he's just tearing me up. He busts my eye open. he does all sorts of stuff, man. He's all so he basically beat, and the whole time he's yanking on my arm saying, "Quit resisting," and I'm like, resisting? I'm like, what are you talking about? You got me cuffed, bro. Like, so I'm just, you know, inside my mind, man, I'm just livid. So he sits me down on the curb after he done beat my butt, and I'm sitting there, and he's like, you know, it would have went a lot better if you didn't resist and this and that. And he was a Hispanic cop, and I'm like, what are you talking about? I was just in my mind, I'm just angry, you know. Like I'm back then, I used to practice witchcraft, and so I'm sitting there and I'm cursing this man with everything that is in me. I am cursing him and wishing death upon him, and I'm calling on, you know, every demonic entity I can think of to just, you know, torment this man, and all sorts of just wickedness, right? He's like, well, do you want to? He's like, you want me to call the ambulance? And I'm just like, yeah. I was like, I want this documented. I was like, you're a punk. I was like, you just beat me up for nothing. And he's like, oh, okay. And he's like trying to play it off. And so then the ambulance get there and they take me to the hospital. These nurses, the people, I'm telling them, I'm like, dude, this dude just beat me up for nothing, man. And they're all looking at me. They're like basically laughing at me. And they treated me like I was like, because I'd been to the hospital many times, and a lot of times the nurses are very nice, you know, and they treat you with respect. They treated me like I was subhuman. Straight, I mean, I literally felt like when I walked out of there that like I was the scum of the earth. And I couldn't believe it, man. I was so angry. Well, anyways, he found a little weed pipe on me. He charged me for that, even though he illegally confiscated it. I ended up going to court. All the charges that he charged me with were dropped, but they charged me with peeing in public, because that's what I admitted. I told him, I was like, that's what I was doing. I was back there. We're talking, it's 11:30 at night, it's dark, and that's the one thing they charged me with. So I had to pay a fine and everything. I had to pay for an attorney, all that. My medical bill was like $1,200 that night. So I'm just walking home, and this is what happens, right? Well, a couple of weeks later, after, I want to say it's about 2 or 3 weeks after this incident with this cop, I'm coming out of a store, and basically, this other cop, this cop that beat me up, he sees me, and he comes rolling up and approaches me right as I'm coming out of the store after I bought something, and he's like, you staying on the right track. You better be doing good around here. You know, this is my neighborhood. And I was all just like, what the? I was like, yeah, dude. I was like, get the hell off me, you know. and like I'm like, like, okay, man. Like, you know, you're basically. I felt like I'm like, you're basically stalking me at this point. He's like, just stay on the right track and everything will be fine. And I'm just like, wow. I get in the car and I'm like sitting there. I'm talking to my friend and I'm like, man. I was so heated. I was so angry, and I wished death upon this man. I was like, man, because I remember the DC sniper incident where there was these father and a son. They were rolling around and they were sniping off cops in Washington, or not cops, but just regular old people. And I was like, man, I wish somebody would just start sniping off the police. And I was like, maybe I should do it. Maybe I should, you know, go get a gun and start doing this. And just all sorts of just wickedness and evil and revenge and just hate towards the police are coming through my head. So after that incident, shortly after, I want to say maybe like a year or two later, I end up surrendering my life completely to Jesus. And I'm not going to get into that whole story because that's just a whole crazy rabbit trail in and of itself. I had a warrant for a DUI in Multnomah County when I surrendered my life to Jesus. I had another warrant in Vancouver. You know, I've been living wrong my whole life, man. I was a criminal. I walked like a criminal. I talked like a criminal. You know, I looked like a criminal, you know. And I lived a very dark life. I was into witchcraft. I mean, I committed, you know, all sorts of activity that could put me in jail for pretty much the rest of my life, you know. And I'm not proud of any of these things at all. But that was my life during that whole time. I had all these incidences with the police. So I get saved, right? I surrender my life to Jesus. Well, the pastor at this church that I get saved at, he's a black man, and he was telling me all sorts of stories about how he grew up in Tennessee, and he had to like, pick cotton for a living, and that was the only main job he could do. And the guy who owned the train to get out to the fields where they would pick cotton, he also owned the cotton field, so he's paying them, and then he would make them pay for the train ticket, and then on the way on that train ticket, he would like overcharge for like food on the train, like like $1 a cookie, and back then that was like super expensive, and so everybody's all hungry from working all day, and so they ended up giving this man back their money just to eat. And he was telling me, he's like, this is a white man, and this was racism, and he's saying, he's like, brother, he goes, I never gave that man a dime. He goes, I waited till I got home to eat. And I remember I saw in his face, that resolve of somebody who has dealt with real racism, Well, anyways, he's ministering to me, and he's like, you got to make things right. And I was like, you don't understand. His name was Pastor Pride. I was like, you don't understand, Pastor Pride. I was like, ain't nothing good gonna come out of interacting with the police. I was like, they're just gonna screw me. I'm not gonna be able to get my license back. I'm not gonna be able to do this or that. I was like, they're just gonna screw me in the end, like they always have. And he's like, brother, you got to make it right. This is what God wants you to do. So eventually, he talked me into turning myself in for these warrants. And I was like, how are we gonna do this? And he's like, well, just roll up to some cops and tell them that you got a warrant and turn yourself in. And I'm like, what? I'm like, seriously? Like, do you understand the police? I'm thinking like in my head, I'm like, you're a black man and you don't know that, like, you don't just roll up on the cops like that. At least in my head, I'm nervous. I'm thinking I might get my butt whooped. So he convinces me to go do this. I mean, think about it. This is the black man telling the white dude that, like, hey, there ain't nothing to worry about. You'll be fine. Well, see, Pastor Pride, he had interactions with the police all the time. He went and ministered to inmates inside these jails. He had no issues with the police at all. This is a man that grew up in real racism, right? Here's me, a white guy, and I'm just like petrified to even be around them. And like, and I don't want to be at their mercy. To me, they're still the enemy. And one thing I did forget too is, after all these incidences, I did hook up with this Vietnam vet guy who was actually proficient in making bombs, and we plotted. I wanted to blow up the Clark County courthouse, and I actually took this seriously. If I had the means to do it, I would have actually went about doing it. That's how whacked out in the head I was back then. But I didn't do it. Glory be to God, because a lot of innocent people would have died. But that's how much my hatred was for the police. I mean, I really... And it was the justice system. I was like, there ain't no justice in the justice system. And it was just pure hatred. So, anyways, back to me turning myself in. So, we roll up on just a squad car over by the Justice Center down there in Portland. And Pastor Pride gets out of the car, and he's like, hey, he goes up to the cops. He's the one that goes up and talks to them first. He goes up and he's like, hey, he's telling them the whole story. He's like, this brother, he wants to make his life right and everything else. So, because I was too nervous to go up and talk to him. But he's like, oh, I'll do it for you. So the black man, right, goes up and he talks to the cop for me. So the cops come out and they're like, oh, so you're turning yourself in, all right? And I was like, yep. And they're like, all right, that's good, man, that's good. They're like, we're glad you're doing this. And they were super respectful. There wasn't nothing, demeaning, belittling, coming out of their mouth. They take me to jail. I end up spending... it was only like 3 or 4 days in jail. I can't remember how much time it was. But they threw me in, I came in for a DUI. They threw me in an area where I was around lifers. People that have life sentences and all sorts of stuff. And I'm playing basketball with a dude that's, he got 22 years and stuff. And I'm like, man, this is crazy. So I just sat there. I just read my Bible the whole time, So that's when it really the page began to turn in my interactions with the police. So after that, I began to seek the Lord, on how I needed to deal with them, because I had to deal with them on a weekly basis after that, because after I turned myself in, it's a long story, I ended up getting put on drug court. And essentially what drug court is you have to report weekly. You have to call up because in a long way, I got convicted as a multiple DUI offender in the state of Washington, which I never even had one DUI in Washington. But like I said, it's a long story. I got completely screwed though. I'll just tell you that the system screwed me. I couldn't get a license, nothing. So I couldn't even get a hardship license back then. So every time you make this phone call, if your color comes up, my color was purple. So if they're like, oh, today's color is, orange or whatever. But if your color comes up, you got to go down to your probation office and you have to do a UA to see if you've been doing drugs and stuff. And so you have to do this every single day. I was on this for 2 years. At the same time, I had to pay for drug treatment, which cost me all sorts of money because my insurance didn't cover it all. I had to get a job. I couldn't get a license, so I had to bus it and walk wherever I was going. I got a job. And I'm doing the drug court thing. I'm totally walking with Jesus at this time. So I'm just like, I don't even want to jaywalk. I was like, I don't want nothing to do with that previous lifestyle. So, excuse me. So anyways, so I end up going through this whole process where I'm going to drug treatment 3 days a week, 2 hours each session. I'm going to AA meetings. I'm doing all these different things, right? And eventually, during that time, the Lord was like, I want you to start praying for police officers. And so part of my healing that had to take place in the Lord was that I had to actually begin to pray for my enemies. So the Lord's telling me, he's like, I want you to pray for these police. So, I remember we were at a Cinco de Mayo festival over in Portland, me and a friend. And there's some cops there patrolling. And, there's lots of different times I prayed for them. But I went up to them, I was like, hey, can I just pray for you guys? And, and I even told him, I was like, I appreciate, what you do and all that. And maybe I didn't like fully wholeheartedly believe it at that time, but I felt like this was I needed to encourage them as well. And so I would pray for them. And every time I prayed for them, I'd just be like, Lord, bless them, da-da-da-da-da. They would be like, thank you, sir. Like, and every time that happened, it's like my heart grew softer for them. It's like my heart grew more loving for the police. And my interactions changed. And my nervousness, I was super nervous around cops. If I got pulled over, I no longer was all nervous like I used to be. And I believe that this was because the grace of the Lord began to settle on my life. Excuse me. And I began to have grace with them. Since I had received God's grace, I can now have grace with others. It was like, since I had God's favor, now I'm having favor with people that I didn't have favor with before. And I believe there was a change there. But not one time during all these incidences I had with the police and my whole history growing up, did it ever cross my mind that I had all these bad encounters with the police? Because there's even more that I'm not even telling about in this video. Which is crazy. But all these bad encounters that I had with the police, I never once thought it was because I was a white person. And nobody ever came up to me and said like, oh man, they just treat you the way they treat you because you're white. But if somebody did, and, there was like some kind of, like track record of this, or this was like a common theme that people talked about, I would have believed it. Because I felt like they were like picking me out. That they were like purposefully trying to go out of their way to get at me. And whether the cop was, Hispanic, white, black, whatever, it didn't matter. It felt like the police were out to get me. And of course, I was living a criminal lifestyle. So I say all this because I think it's very important, to understand that, for one, I believe that if you do receive the grace of God and that you can come into that union with Jesus through the Holy Spirit, that all sorts of things change, right? But if you continue to hold on to a mindset, where you are nervous around the police, where you think that the police are your enemy, where you think that, white people are your enemy, or black people are your enemy, or however it may manifest in your life, you will attract something in that dynamic. I think cops a lot of times are reading people, you know, and when people start to act a certain way, they begin to respond a certain way. But of course, there is just corruption in cops, just like in every single institution, there are corrupt people. And unfortunately, I think that the police, the way it's set up, I am somebody who believes that some of the laws and some of the ways policing is done needs to change big time. I am not for defunding police and a lot of this other kind of like political rhetoric. You know, I believe that's just going to empower criminals, and like I used to be. I would have loved it if the police got defunded. It would have been like open season. So I'm saying all this to basically, I want people to get a different perspective on how all this works, on how if you're told something, you can begin to perceive something a certain way. And if I believed race was the central key component to my interaction with the police, I would have perpetuated that. But since I didn't, it never was put upon me. It was never told to me. I began to come out of that mindset easier once I began to forgive them. And then like I said, and then once I received the grace of God, I began to get grace with them. Once I got God's favor, I began to have favor with them. But if we carry these mindsets that we think that they're the enemy, or that institution is the enemy, and that they are there to oppress us, it shuts down the grace of God, and it shuts down the favor of God in your life. So if you're a Christian, especially these days, if you're a black Christian, and you carry this mindset, if you carry this way of perceiving things, I believe you're going to attract something, because the enemy sees that. The enemy knows, like, hey, this person is in fear. This person is in unforgiveness towards this system. And Jesus makes it very clear that when you carry fear, you carry unforgiveness. It's like an open door to the enemy, and the enemy can begin to do things in your life. Am I dismissing that there are racist cops? Am I dismissing that there are some forms of racism that are just outright, like, just, man, like some white dude just hates black people? No, I'm not dismissing none of that, okay? I know that is true, and that's been true in this country, and is still true. Is it as rampant as a lot of people are making it out to be? I don't think so. Because most of the publicized shootings that I've seen involving police and black men had to do with people that had long criminal rap sheets, and they were resisting arrest and doing this sorts of things. So I hope this video blesses you. I hope you understand how important it is to get a different perspective, to change the way we think, to really repent and look at things the way God sees them. God bless.